Hello dear Motorsport-Magazin friends and Formula One fans. The 2023 Formula One season was anything but exciting at the top. At this point, my Austrian colleagues would say it was pretty dull. In 2024, many of you are now saying, as big as the gap was, why should anything change? Red Bull has collected 860 points in the Constructors' Championship. Mercedes, as the first runner-up, you almost have to put that in quotation marks, had 409 points, so less than half. Max Verstappen alone scored 575 points, so he would have won the Constructors' World Championship single-handedly. Red Bull won 21 out of 22 races. Why should there be any suspense at all in 2024? That's exactly the question we asked ourselves, and we actually found a few answers. I'm curious to see if you think we're dreamers, if you'll say what a fairy tale uncle I am. But let's take a look at a few hopefuls for the 2024 Formula One season. We'll start with Ferrari. For me personally, Ferrari is the number one hopeful. They were the last top team to rely on the downwash side pod for the aerodynamic concept. They only introduced the concept at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya in Spain. That's why I think they were the least able to work out the concept and get the most out of it. Of course, this has to do with the fact that the architecture underneath the carbon shell was not adapted to it. What is under the carbon shell is what is developed months in advance and is very difficult to adapt during the season. We are mainly talking about the side impact structures, of which there are two on each side, an upper and a lower one. At Ferrari, the problem was actually the lower side impact structure. At Ferrari, this lower impact structure was integrated into the side pod inlet, but then the team completely changed the concept, so they no longer needed it in this form. If we now look at all the other teams apart from Haas, we see that the lower side impact structure is actually integrated into the top of the floor. So that didn't work after the concept change, and it was then simply positioned unfavorably in the wind. Now you say, why don't they just move it? The part itself could be moved relatively easily, but you have to adjust the monocoque accordingly. After all, there are incredible forces at work, which is the whole point if an accident should occur. And that all has to be absorbed by the chassis. That's hardly possible during the season. You need a new homologation, new crash tests, and so on. I strongly assume that we will see this lower side impact structure much further down on the Ferrari in 2024. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur has already announced that 95% of the car will be new. Many parts were new last year, but it was already said at the presentation of the SF23 that it would only be an evolution. The revolution will now come in the 2024 Formula One season. And it remains to be seen whether shifting the side impact structure a little and making the aerodynamic concept extremely Red Bull oriented will be enough. But there are also other adjustments, such as the front or rear suspension. Ferrari currently has exactly the opposite of what Red Bull Racing has. Push rods on the front axle and pull rods on the rear axle. These modifications were also very difficult to make during the season. Front axle, of course, chassis, rear axle, gearbox housing. These are major things that can be tackled over the winter. At the same time, however, you also have to adapt this to the aerodynamic concept. That's why I have high hopes that there is still a lot to be done at Ferrari. If we move away from the technology a little, we have already seen a certain positive trend after the original concept change. Fred Vasseur was able to provide new impetus. He said that everyone at Ferrari warned him that things would go quite well at the start of the season, but then they would go downhill. For him, it was exactly the opposite. He thought, oh, if that was the best, then have fun with the rest of the Formula One season. But we could see an upward trend. Fred Vasseur was able to provide new impetus. For example, he made changes relatively quickly in the strategy department. We have seen far fewer big mistakes than in the past. But also in terms of car performance, especially when we talk about tire wear, which was catastrophic at the beginning of last season, in the end they actually managed it quite well. They took the only non-Red Bull victory in Singapore. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz both had phases of strength and weakness, but overall that was a very decent driver pairing. With Charles Leclerc, we know anyway that when everything is right, he's damn quick. He's taken 5 pole positions, a total of 7 pole positions for Ferrari. The qualifying performance was really encouraging, and if they can now get a grip on tire wear and make a small improvement in general, they might be a threat to Red Bull. Now we're talking about Mercedes, the constructors' runner-up, the first pursuer in quotation marks. The time had come in Monaco, the concept was changed. However, Mercedes only decided to change the concept after the start of the 2023 Formula One season, namely after the Bahrain Grand Prix at the Sakhir International Circuit. There they realized that their zero side pod concept was not going to work again, and only then did they make the final decision to go in a different direction. It had already been in the drawer for a while, but then everything happened very quickly. At Mercedes, it's a bit different to Ferrari, where the side impact structure has at least been integrated into the top of the floor, but the upper side impact structure is the problem. Why? There were no side pods in the original concept of the W13 and W14, but this crash structure had to be disguised and integrated somehow. That's why they designed this single wing on the chassis, which also has the mirror on it. When they then introduced the side pods and a proper horizontal opening, there would actually have been room for the side impact structure, but it was in the wrong place. I'll repeat what I've just said about Ferrari for Mercedes. I strongly assume that this will be packaged very differently in the 2024 Formula One season, and exactly what applies to the side impact structure naturally also applies to the wheel suspensions at Mercedes. They're in the Ferrari camp, so I'm curious to see whether they'll switch to the Red Bull camp if they want to change the aerodynamic concept perfectly. And now I'll say one thing that applies to both. Both integrated the concept very, very late, the aerodynamic downwash concept on the side pod, and both were not adapted to it. And that's where I see the big joker for Ferrari and Mercedes, that there's still a lot of potential, much more than with the competition, which relied on this concept right from the start and where the architecture under the carbon shell was already right. Does Red Bull Racing still have so much potential? Is there still a real game changer? Adrian Newey will probably prove me wrong, but I can hardly imagine it with these very restrictive regulations that we have. But in my opinion, Ferrari and Mercedes definitely still have this joker up their sleeve. Then there are also personnel changes at Mercedes. James Allison has been back for a few months now. Next year's car, the 2024 car, which was really created under him, is definitely a beacon of hope for Mercedes. The driver pairing of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton is certainly one of the best driver pairings on the grid, and Lewis Hamilton should also find it a little easier next year due to the seating position. That was also a problem. He certainly exaggerated a bit. He said that the Mercedes drivers are the only ones who sit as good as on the front axle. It's not quite that bad, but for his taste, the seating position was just a bit too far forward, and they want to change that in 2024. And then I'm curious to see whether things will go much better for him personally. Those were the first two big hopes for the 2024 Formula One season from our point of view, but you are definitely the biggest hope for Motorsport-Magazin. You are looking for a new challenge, you want to enter the world of Formula One or motorsport, and can imagine working for us. We are looking for reinforcement for the editorial team, but also here in the position of video host. If you are interested in taking up the full-time position in Graz, please apply. You can find all the details at jobs.motorsportmagazine.com, and I'm sure you're a much bigger hope than Mercedes, than Ferrari, and than the next two teams we're going to talk about. McLaren, of course, you can't get past the team of the moment. A fantastic second half of the season with the update in Austria. Things just went upwards. Disastrous start, and then snap, and the McLaren was suddenly the second best car. In Brazil, they could almost put Red Bull or Max Verstappen under pressure. So Lando Norris at least almost made it. That was very encouraging. The fast corners suited the McLaren MCL60 really well. Sometimes they were even faster than the Red Bull. And the Red Bull is actually a real weapon in the fast corners. The MCL60's problem, on the other hand, was the slow corners. Lando Norris kept complaining that on the one hand, that was the problem, and on the other hand, you had to drive the car in a way that was completely unnatural for his driving style. Why am I emphasizing this now? The aerodynamic development at McLaren over the last season was terrific. On the mechanical side, and we also talk about this in the slow corners, of course, it's always a combination of aerodynamics and mechanics. But on the mechanical side, of course, it is much more difficult to make improvements over the season than on the aerodynamic side. These are similar points to those we have already addressed at Mercedes and Ferrari. A lot has to change structurally, and McLaren now has this opportunity over the winter. So there is still potential for optimization, especially when you consider that the lap time is mainly gained in the slow corners and not so much in the fast corners, because I spend less time there. Infrastructure has also been a big issue in Woking for years. You almost can't hear it anymore. The wind tunnel, which they previously rented from Toyota in Cologne, isn't horrible, don't get that wrong, but it's obviously not completely up to date for Formula One, and it's obviously a big advantage for the infrastructure if they have it all in-house. This is now finally the case at McLaren. The wind tunnel is in place, and they want to reap the first fruits of this new wind tunnel in 2024. On the driver side, Lando Norris has already proven that he is one of the absolute top stars in Formula One. Oscar Piastri has already impressed in his rookie season, and I'm excited to see what he can do in year 2. We now have 3 of the 4 biggest hopefuls behind us. Who is still missing? The green wonder Aston Martin. We mustn't forget that Aston Martin was the first Red Bull pursuer at the start of the 2023 season, at least in the form of Fernando Alonso. They made a huge step over the winter, and that's something that unites Aston Martin and McLaren. They've made huge strides. We haven't seen that from Mercedes and Ferrari. They now know which screws they really have to turn to make the big leaps. Aston Martin did it over the winter, McLaren during the season, and for many people that's a sign that they at least know which way to go. Even if Aston Martin went in the wrong direction during the season, they took a bit of a wrong turn. At the end of the season, however, they found their direction again, and that is of course good for the future if you know you are going in this direction. You know you've already made a huge step forward over the last winter, partly due to new personnel, of course. Dan Fallows, who came from Red Bull, has already been able to provide good input. Fernando Alonso is also one of the newer members of staff. He now knows the team. He was able to say where he wants the car to be, and that may also be a point that could lead Aston Martin forward in the coming season. We've already talked about the infrastructure at McLaren. The same applies to Aston Martin. For the first time in the team's history, there is now real money to invest. Lawrence Stroll is getting serious. They have just moved into the new factory during the last season. There's no denying that this was a factor in why things were a little behind schedule, but I'm sure they will only be able to enjoy the full benefits of the new factory in the course of the new season. In terms of the wind tunnel, they are not quite as far along as McLaren, but that will also come gradually. And then we've already talked about the wheel suspensions at Mercedes and Ferrari. McLaren, for example, is already fully committed to the Red Bull concept, and has been since season 1 of this regulation period, by the way, while Aston Martin is in the same camp as Mercedes and Ferrari. There is a reason for this, at least on the rear axle, because Aston Martin, unlike McLaren, gets its rear axle from the Mercedes works team. If Mercedes were to carry out major modifications over the winter, for example, by switching to push rods on the rear axle, then Aston Martin would also benefit. Of course, they already know more. They have to design the aerodynamic concept accordingly. And then at Aston Martin, it's perhaps a little bit like what I mentioned earlier with Ferrari and Mercedes. There is still a conceptual change that holds a certain amount of potential that the other teams may no longer have. In the end, however, we can probably all agree that a lot will depend on how Red Bull performs. What does the development curve look like for the world champion team? Has it already flattened out a bit? Sure, the regulations, we talked about them a lot at the beginning of this regulation period, don't leave as much room for maneuver. Can you still take the same big steps now as you did at the beginning? How early did Red Bull write off the 2023 season because they knew they would win anyway? Have they already done a lot of preparatory work for 2024? Will it pay off? These are the crucial questions. At the same time, when we talk about hopefuls, we obviously have to talk about the aerodynamic testing restrictions. Red Bull has the fewest, i.e. the most restrictions, but the least capacity. But is that really such a glimmer of hope? We have already seen that this wasn't the case last season. Red Bull even had the penalty and nothing really changed. I'm looking forward to the 2024 season. Am I a dreamer? Yes or no? Feel free to write it in the comments. Who, if anyone, do you think has the chance to challenge Red Bull? It would make a bit of a difference to simply get closer, put Red Bull under pressure, and then Max Verstappen might also make mistakes. So I'm curious on the one hand what it looks like in sporting terms. On the other hand, what you think. Am I a fairy tale uncle? Feel free to write it in the comments.